So types of heat networks. I think it's quite helpful to remind ourselves that there is this range of heat networks. And I've got three different ways of characterising them here. In terms of scale, from the smallest, just a few homes, right through to the city scale. We've got issues around ownership in terms of might be community owned or local authority. We have a lot of heat networks are owned by housing owners, housing developers. And there's an important sector which is the campus, the universities or hospitals or military bases. A lot of the heat networks in that situation. It's interesting how we develop those up. Of course, there can be private company ones, which is where we come in, and finally, there are joint ventures. And this leads to these differences in the way they're procured that you can see down the right, the different delivery models. Again, obviously focusing, because I'm in the piece about large networks, on a subset of these, which you can see here, but I'm not going to dwell on that too much. The next thing I wanted to do is just to whip through very quickly some examples of different versions of these different heat networks. So we are seeing a reasonable bit of growth from the smaller networks, and I'm sorry for so there's an interesting thing about community networks, and it does seem to be quite challenging. And there's one in Cambridgeshire, Swaffham Prior, which people talk about a lot as a community heat network. But interestingly, it's actually being built by Cambridgeshire County Council, and they're taking the risk behind it, which I think is quite telling. What we are seeing, though, is more low-density new builds being built with heat networks, which is slightly surprising because I wasn't sure that was going to work, but it does appear to work. And I'm sorry that I've written Rendesco, the last one, my colleagues here from Last Mile, but it's the same thing here. And then, of course, we have lots of these communal heat networks, and this is a big scheme that we build and operate. We built and operate in Plumstead in East London. And there are, of course, a lot of these. But the point being, they tend to be insular. They're looking at how they deliver for their own network. And of course, historically, they've nearly all used gas boilers, but they're clearly a key target for us when we're building our networks. And as I say, most of them are owned by the property owner, but we're beginning to see some which are going through an ESCO route to provide the support to those networks. I mentioned earlier the campus networks, and actually this is something that there really are quite a lot of. And I've thrown up some pictures here of the schemes that we were involved with building, and listing some of the others. And as Roddy mentioned, a lot of these were built originally with gas CHP. It's a financial decision primarily. It makes a lot of sense if you can use the heat and the power. And it poses some really challenging questions for all of us. How can a campus network, which is making, or at least washing its face financially, how can we find a way to help those to decarbonise in a cost-effective way? Because these institutions aren't awash with money in order to go to a lower carbon solution. I think the answer to that is big heat networks, but we'll have to see how that plays out. Generally speaking, in my experience, these campus sites aren't particularly interested in supplying heat to anybody else. It's a whole level of complication for them to become a heat supplier rather than just a user. Moving on then, getting into the bigger heat networks. Most of the biggest heat networks currently have been developed by local authorities. We've been involved with the four I'm showing on the screen here. It's obligatory to have a picture of Queen's Quay and a Scotland heat network presentation, so I put that one in. So the other schemes, I couldn't find any nice pictures. I think we need to work on our photo library, Alan, because they're mostly pretty grungy pictures, but maybe that's what they're like. But so these are important because a lot of the schemes start this way. And I think what we're all talking about today and going forward is how the ambition for these is increased and the rate of delivery can be made faster, because I think it's fair to say some of these have not developed at the rate that we might have hoped they would, and we need to find ways to enable them to grow much more quickly from where they are. I picked up also there's a number of joint venture strategic energy partnership projects. I'm not going to talk about these more because I think that's what's following in Paul's piece in a moment. But strategic energy partnerships is a thing which has been coming more to the to the fore in the last year or so. Been discussions in England, a number of cities thinking about whether to do this. For those who aren't familiar, the idea of this is that it brings more than just a heat network. Because if delivering a heat network wasn't complicated enough, the aspiration is to deliver a whole lot of other stuff as well alongside it. And it's a good idea. My slight worry is it might just further complicate the procurements. As an example from a town in northern England, where it feels like it's adding at least a whole year to the procurement, and this is not what we want. So I don't object to them per se, but I'd like people to keep moving quickly. And then the next group are what I call merchant schemes, sometimes concessions. So this is the genuine private ones. And actually, I have to say I should know more about what Gren are doing in Glasgow because we're potentially supporting them, but I don't know much about that. But there's been a lot of activity in England. One Energy in particular have been pushing things through. I'll let Paul comment on where things are at in Granton. We're developing a scheme. It's not broken ground yet at Loughborough, serving the university and an area of housing development, all being well. Fingers crossed that all comes together. So I think this is a really exciting development to be aware of, that as the opportunities have grown, there are a number of people, ourselves including, but we have competitors, who are looking to develop these schemes, sometimes directly, sometimes through a concession route. And I think it won't surprise you to hear that I think this is an important part of the route in terms of achieving things. And then the part which was just touched on, and I think is really important, I think, for everybody here to follow, at least to some extent, is what's going on in England. The Advanced Zoning Programme has set up models by which these heat networks can be developed. There was another webinar yesterday bringing people up to date with that. And as you may already know, there's the Swan network, pictured there, which we're involved with Hemico. OPDC is Old Oak Park Development Corporation, that's in West London. Another big development which Hemico are leading. Plymouth and Leeds have just gone out to procurement, just starting off. And there are three which were irritatingly all about to land at the same time, Bolton, Trafford and Stockport. You think they could organise to come to market a little bit further apart. But they're all due to launch in September. And in parallel, there are procurements ongoing, not completed, for Sunderland, Peterborough and Birkenhead. These are all schemes, average 50 million, 30, 50, 90, 100 million pound schemes. So there's a lot bubbling up coming through these procurement processes. And a lot of you will know this, but I think it's quite helpful just to understand the models that are being proposed here. DESNES do allow the possibility that a local authority can lead this entirely, but they are pretty strongly discouraging it, is the sense I get from all of them, just because of the difficulties of making the process work. So we're seeing these three models, which are a development agreement, which is essentially a concession. There's an agreement that one particular partner will develop the scheme. They say what they're going to do. They'll be tracked through the zoning management, but essentially they just get on with it. There's a special golden share model which enables the local authority to retain an element of control over some aspects of what the development is like, but it doesn't cost them anything. And initially everybody was opting for this option because it gave them some control without any money. And finally there's a joint venture option when the council is able to put money in, assuming it's able to raise money and chooses to do so, and has a full stake in what happens downstream. So far in England, none of the procurements have taken this method. For me to say, well, I don't know why, but it hasn't come up so far. And this next slide is my interpretation of what's going on. And there's a series of steps in these procurements. What I think is most positive, and I'd like to encourage, if our colleague from Scottish Government is listening, is this is particularly helpful for the market. Basically all the procurements are the same. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can, obviously you need to change what you're saying to suit the circumstances of the project you're going through, but they're very similar in terms of a methodology. So there's a soft market test. You announce the scheme in good time. You tell people 4, 5, 6 months ahead it's coming. There's then a selection questionnaire when they slim down the number of bidders to 3 or 4. And there's then a detailed procurement process. And what, as I said, is really helpful is both the selection questionnaires and the ITTs, they're almost identical. So you can put your effort into adapting what you're saying to the city in question rather than reinventing the wheel and having a whole new application process, which I have to say is a bit of a pain when local authorities do this, and every procurement is different. So at the end of that process, one partner is selected who does the development and commercialisation work, typically over a year or so, at the end of which, if it's all systems go, you move into building. Of course, if it isn't all systems go, you're back to square one. It's worth noting that this is still taking quite a long time, but it's a lot quicker than a lot of things have happened in the past. And I think this is, if I can have any message out there, is let's just get a move on. Let's not prevaricate, let's get into the process and test the water and see if these things are really going to work. Am I okay? Time. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about money, because this matters a lot. So where does the money come from to build these heat networks? Well, you might get some grants, you may get some connection charges, which is a topic, probably an hour's worth of topic to talk about connection charges, so we'll just park that. But the bulk of, fundamentally, the bulk of the money and the risk aspect of this is coming from the equity, whoever is going to invest this. Now, it could be local authority, if they can find the money to take the risk aspect, but otherwise it's private. Generally speaking, you can't get debt until you've got something tangible to borrow money against, which is later on. You might get some benefit from heat sales. And it's worth pointing out at this stage that the aspiration for 20% of heat to come from heat networks, roughly speaking, is £100 billion of expenditure, capex. It might be 120, it might be 80, that depends on, you can adjust the numbers to suit. But it feels implausible that taxpayers are going to fund a large proportion of this. So it feels inevitable that the majority of this money is going to come from the private sector. You can disagree with me on that, but that's my view. And just to understand a little bit about the way this happens in a real project, we've got quite a long initial period, the pre-construction, the feasibility stage, over on the left. And then you reach the point, hopefully, when you say, we're going to build. And then the depth is the cash, how much money we're spending, and how low it goes. And then, all being well, fingers crossed, from the operation period, you're making a margin on the heat sale. And you have to have a margin on the heat sale, because otherwise you can never pay for all that capex that we've put in at the beginning. So you have to have that period there. And I've shown that later on you'll have to have some RepEx to repair things. There's no finance in this model, which is why it looks the way it does. But this is just meant to be an indicative thing, by the way. This is made up, not real numbers, but just to give you a flavour of what it's like. And then looking at this in slightly different way, I was thinking about, well, where does this money come from? And this imaginary scheme is costing 50 million of capex. And of that, represented in two slightly different ways here, typically between a half and 2/3 is coming from equity. Hopefully get a certain one. You might get a certain amount of grant, you might get a certain amount of connection charges. But it's important to understand the extent of that equity investment, the risk element, and also that if the connection charges are late or the capex turns out to be higher, you might need to find another 5 or 10 million. And that's where you need the investors to have pretty deep pockets to make this happen, because if a local authority finds it's 10 million short, they're not going to say, oh, well, we'll just use that money, because they won't have that money. It won't be comfortable for the equity investor either, of course, but it's still a part of what needs to happen. So just to wrap up, there's a lot of potential and different approaches that have been used to developing heat networks over the years. But to state the obvious, really, large heat networks require really significant investment. And we need speed of action. That if we want these things built and operating by 2030, we needed to have started already. We need to get a move on. There's a great opportunity here for Scotland to look and see whether these methods are working that are being used in England. My observation is that a little while ago, Scotland felt like it was progressing in some respects faster than England, but I think it's fair to say that's no longer true. You've seen there's like 10 big procurements coming around in England now as we speak. So now I think Scotland is falling behind compared to England. That may not be a bad thing. not for me to say, but it's certainly an observation. And I expect most funding ultimately to come from the private sector. I can't see how the local authorities are going to find these, where the local authority is going to get 20, 50, 70 million from to invest in these heat networks over the next few years, even less so any other types of informal groupings. This is the scale we're talking about and why I think these things need to progress. That's me done.
Emma asked me to come and talk about specifically about the MEL project as a case study, so it follows on well. We were going to speak the other way around, but it made a lot more sense that Andy did that introduction and talked about all of the delivery model options, and then I'll talk specifically about how Midlothian Energy Limited is set up, what makes it a successful partnership, what a bit about the partnership and how that partnership is structured, how it works, how it operates. I'll talk about what the joint venture is doing now and has completed, and what we're doing next. And I think I think a lot of the people in the room, I see a lot of familiar faces, will have heard an awful lot of this before, but I hopefully I've got some new insights and new information and updates on where we're going next with and where the exciting opportunities are, particularly around community involvement and how we're engaging with community through the joint venture. And the role that Midlothian Council plays as the representative of community in the partnership. So I won't dwell on much about who we are, but just briefly for those who don't know what Vattenfall are up to. We're a large energy utility. We combine expertise in generation, distribution, storage and supply of energy to consumers. We have a portfolio of large-scale onshore and offshore wind, hydro, solar, nuclear, district heating and power network infrastructure, and we supply energy to millions of customers in Northern Europe. But as many of you may well be aware, Vattenfall is currently assessing the ownership of its heat network portfolio across the whole of Europe. That includes and impacts us in the UK, and that change of owner is likely to be concluded by the end of this year, and more information will come as that process concludes. And while that change of ownership does clearly affect how we finance projects in the UK, it doesn't change the fact that Vattenfall Heat UK or the Heat UK business will continue to operate, is continuing to build and invest in projects, it's continuing to explore new opportunities, and it will continue post transfer of the business, and as we work through that transition process. And our ambition for Scotland therefore continues. We will continue to establish and build out the low carbon heat networks. We'll grow the networks that we already have in operation. We'll look to deliver heat and hot water to communities, to use local resources and create economic growth in the Scottish economy. I'll talk about our partnership in more detail in a moment, but also I'll respond to Andrew's question about Granton. So a lot of people in this room are working with us on Granton in many ways. We are currently working towards an investment decision by the end of this year for Granton. That is happening in parallel with this change of owner, and so works pretty neatly in that process, because the new owner is fully aware of the Granton project investment that they will have to make as we move into this process. And we've discussed in a lot of detail that with City of Council, who we are under a pre-development agreement with, and we'll enter into a concession agreement with in due course. But those in the room may be interested. We've launched our procurement of contractors for one element of the project, for the on-plot works, and we're about to launch our procurement of a contracting partner for the main energy centre and the main spine network as well. So that is forthcoming in the next month or so that we launch. We've also got as Andrew mentioned, we've got other projects. I won't dwell on them, but we're working obviously in Bristol, our largest heat network, which we acquired from Bristol City Council. So that is progressing. We've got major investments continuing to happen in Bristol throughout the course of this year and into the 5-year business plan we have going forwards. And in Brent Cross, we are launching the procurement of the Energi Centre, which will start on site next year. For the main Energy Centre is currently in operation, served by temporary heat from a temporary energy centre, but that will convert into the main Energy Centre once it's built, over the course of next year, which is an large-scale air source heat pump energy centre, which will serve the whole of Brent Cross town site. So, yeah, I want to, as I move into the sort of discussion of MEL, I could talk about what makes that a successful partnership. It brings together the complementary strengths of Vattenfall, Midlothian Council, but also Scottish Government, with the government providing regulatory leadership and the funding support to the project through the Low Carbon Infrastructure Transition Programme that was provided to the project. The council bring local insight. They have planning powers. They have regulatory powers over multiple aspects of the ability to compulsory purchase in the absence of statutory undertaker rights. That has been helpful to us. They provide land to the project, and most importantly, they can compel through planning customers to engage with the heat network and to connect to the system. And Vattenfall bring deep technical expertise, commercial expertise in negotiating agreements and structuring the complex contractual structures that have to exist in a project like this, and also funding and investment in heat networks. But what unites us is a shared ambition. Scottish Government and Midlothian Council are driving towards net zero and delivering thriving communities, while Vattenfall delivers our mission of enabling fossil freedom through real-world place-based solutions. Across Northern Europe, we've seen heat networks succeed when communities are placed at the heart of delivery, and the 50-50 public-private joint venture model achieves exactly that. So it involves the council as a representative of community in organising the delivery, governance and oversight, and that approach builds trust, ensures accountability, and aligns the project with local priorities and social value, and Midlothian Energy is held to account on all of those aspects through the board structure that I'll talk about. It also helps us to navigate the complex landscape of policy, regulation, and stakeholder interests. And Midlothian Council can also, as I said before, assure demand through support and compulsion for decarbonisation. And that also works. That is also supported by the forthcoming regulation that James talked about. We have a shared vision across the parties, across the partners, that defines the technical and commercial framework and integrates district heating into strategic planning. And we engage regularly on the local development plan and the future priorities that Midlothian Council have outside of just the heat network priorities and local heat energy efficiency strategy priorities. And then that strategy is connected to delivery. So using zoning and the local heat energy efficiency strategy and the feasibility assessments developed within Midlothian Energy, we can develop viable low carbon heat networks that are well planned, coordinated with the wider policy priorities in the council, and are tailored to the needs of communities. And I'll talk about the project that we're working on in Downhall at the moment as an expansion of the heat network, which will serve an existing community of low density housing. And how do we approach something as complex as that? Because that is where we need to go next. I mean, we've had it easy with building a heat network serving new build development. It's going to be much harder as we reach out to existing homeowners, existing communities, and how do we work street by street. So I'll talk a bit about the structure of MEL. if that moves on. Yes. So MEL was conceived by Midlothian Council as a wide-ranging strategic energy partner. The procurement was based on a reference design, which is the heat network that we have now built and is in operation. But the procurement was structured to afford the partnership to deliver a very wide range of energy services. We are governed by a board of 4 directors, 2 from Midlothian Council and 2 from Vattenfall. And the joint venture structure is supported by a series of foundational agreements, shareholders agreements, concession agreements, which define the responsibilities of the partners. And there's also a management services agreement where all services are delivered into Midlothian Energi. So Midlothian Energi has no staff. Midlothian Energi brings staff in through that management service agreement from both the council and from Vattenfall. The 5-year business plan that MEL operates is renewed on an annual basis. New project proposals are presented for shareholder approval through the project origination committee. So at the bottom there you'll see a series of 4 committees that exist with delegated authority for various aspects of the operation of the joint venture company. So the origination committee brings new projects to the board for decision and for approval. Once those projects have reached an outline business case, they receive their own project committee, which enables the delivery of the project. Those projects move through to completion, and then effectively, once completed and in operation, they are governed by an operations committee that ensures that the effective operation of all assets that are built. And then we have an overriding finance committee, which ensures the accountability and all audits of the financial performance of the company. And that they all report ultimately to the board that review all activity and approve business plan on an annual basis and approve any significant decisions that need to be taken in the organisation of the company. So far, MEL has built its first major asset, the energy centre you can see on the left-hand side there. That is taking heat from the FCC Energy from Waste plant next door to that site. It serves. It will serve the 3,000 homes at Shawfair. We are connecting homes there on a weekly basis now. We're connecting homes in Craighall Village, which is a separate agreement that we have with Cala, who are building out Craighall Village, and we are currently negotiating additional expansions across a wider area, reaching across towards the Bywater to other housing developments that are coming forwards. And as I said, I'll touch on Vattenfall in a moment. We took on our first customers at the end of 2024, and alongside all of that, we're delivering social value and through various activities, working on skills and training with the Energy Training Academy, working with Powering Futures and Edinburgh Science on the careers pathway that we've developed, and working with our supply chain on delivering multiple apprenticeships through the project that we've completed. We started on site with that project in 2023. In March 23, we had heat live by June 2024, and as I said, first heat on with customers was in November 2024, after the project was handed back to us from the contractor in October. The first customers were served by a temporary energy centre, the Craighall Village. We are in the process of connecting Craighall Village back to the main energy centre. There's a crossing, a railway crossing we have to get in place, which we are concluding at the moment. So that will connect in the next few months, but it's currently served by energy centre, by the temporary energy centre. This shows a bit more about the current scale of the existing network. The technical solution we have is Energy Centre serves a main transmission network that serves a series of substations that main network is pre-insulated steel pipes operating the flow temperature of the operating flow temperature of 70 degrees. We can increase that temperature, but it typically operates at 70 degrees. We have substations where we step the temperature and pressure down, and serves the plots through pre-insulated plastic pipe with direct connection to homes, so direct HIUs in all individual homes. So as we continue, we're expanding the network north to Byrecourt. We're looking to connect existing buildings. We're looking to connect university NHS campus property at the Byrecourt. We are engaging with other house builders in the area who are looking to expand out with the Shorefare development, and we're continuing to connect the properties as plots come forward within Shorefare. But we're also looking at other energy efficiency generation and infrastructure projects across the wider Midlothian, and that's what that slide on the right is, and what this next slide starts to look at, which is the wider opportunities that we have out with the first project that we've delivered. So we're exploring how to connect street by street properties in Dandle Hall and in Woodburn. And those areas are both heavily dominated by council and social owned housing. There is a significant programme of retrofit ongoing that Midlothian Council are leading on, and we're working very closely with Midlothian Council's housing team to effect a heat network at the same time as they're going in and doing that retrofit, so that the customer gets disrupted once, the homes the fabric is delivered through the programmes that Midlothian Council is delivering, and at the same time we can bring connections into those properties, or at least we can enable the connection to be available, and we can run a programme of connection later on. That is a highly complex exercise in community and stakeholder engagement, and we're taking it very carefully. What we don't want to do is to set some sort of expectation with customers that this is going to happen in the near term, and then we fail to deliver on that promise. So we're working very hard to plan that very carefully, to create the right communication mechanisms, the right engagement with the right community leaders within the local areas that we're working, and that is, we're at the start of that journey, but I hope we can share more with on that in due course. There's a few other slides that I had, but if you want to just dwell on that one, we plan we have started to share information, and we will continue to share information on the sort of standard agreements that we're setting up, on the specifications that we're using, technical specifications, and some of the redacted legal standards that we're looking to use. So we will be publishing those on our website as time progresses, but we're keen to share that information with industry, so that we can start to kind of agree precedent principles and standards. So thank you very much.